Comic Book Savant, Got Questions, Episode 6. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode is an Ask Me Anything, which I now have dubbed Got Questions episode, responding to questions that I got from you, the Comic Book Savant community, which is the Comic Book Savant Society. So we have a handful of questions this episode, so I'm just going to jump right in it with your questions and try to answer them to the best of my ability. The first question we have for this episode is from Courtney Smith, which is on our Comic Book Society Facebook group. And the question is, have you ever considered or pursued the idea of creating your own comic book series? Actually, to answer your question, Courtney, I actually did many years ago, even before I started the podcast, actually. It was a pool of friends of mine. I had a friend that I worked with that was an art teacher and was inspiring to want to break into comics, and he knew a few people that were in the industry, and we all kind of pulled together and we would meet, multiple times a month and like brainstorm and help one another out. I would dabble on the writing side, and I had a concept for my character, and I've talked about it years and years ago here on the podcast. I cannot fathom what episodes I talked about it. I had a concept. I still have the concept, notes, sketches, everything, where I literally did put together a whole comic idea. I actually went to Heroes Con and when I still lived in North Carolina, and actually pitched it to some companies, but I had an unfortunate situation with my friend that was a comic artist. He got cold feet. We went going to pitch people. He just up and chickened out and walked out with some of my sketches that he had did for me. So I couldn't fully pitch my book because he just up and left without telling me anything, and told me later, which really hurt me. So I never know if I could have sold the idea or not. But sometimes that's the downside with working with people. You think their passion is as strong as yours, and when it's time to put everything out there to try to make that dream work, and they're not ready for it. They say they are, but a lot of times I like to say action speaks louder than words. So it never took off. And from that point, it's no way, I fancied myself when I was younger as a semi decent, artist, but I was never formally trained. So I don't know if it was anything I could ever do as far as on that level of producing a monthly comic and writing it. But I had aspirations to develop that idea at some point. It just never happened. And then I eventually decided to do a podcast, and 15 years later I'm still doing a podcast. But it's something at some point I would love to address. I've seen aspects of what I developed be other people come up with it, and seen it on TV shows or movies, but it's I would still, like I said, at some point would like to do it one day. Maybe I dust it off and see if I could give it a go. Next question I have is from Paul Beverly from the group as well, and they said, he asked, do you have any favorite weapons or gadgets that a character has in comics? And I have a couple, and it was hard for me to pick, so I kind of did like my top 5. First and foremost, I love, they call them I hope I pronounce this correctly, the Eskrima sticks from Nightwing. I always just loved that from him, that he would have them, in like behind his shoulders, and he would grab them, and just him fighting, and it mixed perfectly with his style. So I always loved those. Of course, the utility belt from Batman, cool, always cool. The bow staff from Robin, also with Donatello from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of course. Always thought a bow staff was cool. Don't think I would ever be able to use one, because awkward as I am with stuff like that, I would probably bop myself repeatedly upside the head and face. So no thank you. But it seems cool. Um, Also, the Billy Club stick from Daredevil, which has multiple. He can use it so many different ways. We've seen him use kind of like as that collapsible. When he's as Matt Murdock, he uses it as his walking cane, but then it can break down. And you've seen him kind of use them as nunchucks. You've kind of seen him use them as experiment sticks. You've seen them use, they're multifunctional tool, and that's why I always thought which was so cool. And then like I loved the way I could fold them up and just like slide them on his thigh. He had that holster there in the thigh for him. Just always thought that was kind of cool, quintessential weapon / gadget. And you can't have a list like this and not have Captain America and his shield. You gotta have it on a list like this. So those are my top picks when it comes to my favorite weapons and or gadgets for a character in comics. Paul also asked, with all the reboots and revisiting of old material that goes on nowadays, is there a comic run event or crossover that you would like to see more of or continuation of? And he said personally, I would like to see another run of Ex Machina. Ex Machina. And I think he said also a retake on Acts of Vengeance. I don't know about how I feel about Ex Machina. I read the first trade and totally hated it. But that's a Trade Your Pick episode that's way back in the archives. Acts of Vengeance is one that I could probably agree about. I loved it at the time. If you're unfamiliar with it, Acts of Vengeance was, I guess it was like an event. It was an event crossover because it crossed over through a lot of books, had the Acts of Vengeance emblem on it. So it was, and I think they did an omnibus about it, released an omnibus on Acts of Vengeance not too long ago. And they tried to do I can't remember what they called. They tried to revisit the in comics a couple of years ago. It wasn't what it should have been, and no one talked about it. But the original Acts of Vengeance is that the villains all came together, I think spearheaded by Loki, and they all decided to swap their hero combinations to throw the heroes off and potentially to finally like take them down, because they fought them so many times. They know how to beat you. So if we throw them off balance by us switching off, and we do it as a organized kind of thing, we could come together and actually win. They didn't, but it was really cool. It made for some really cool comics. So that might be one that I could probably say. I'm not sure about any other events off the top of my head, because I don't know about everyone else, but I think I have total event fatigue at this point. Like I'm still like War of the Realms. I wanted to read that, and I bought the trade and all that. I haven't gotten to it yet. And then there's been 100 other crossovers since. Now we're, Black is King or whatever the heck it is. They have so many, I literally can't keep up with them. So I have event fatigue, but I like the Act of Vengeance recommendation because I really loved it at the time, for sure. That, and the only other one that I felt like that was done really well when I was a kid in the mid 80s was the Mutant Massacre, and how it crossed over to so many books across the Marvel imprint, not just the X-Men books, but it was like heaviest there. But other books did cross over to it, and it had a really big impact across the board for not just the X-Men, but just the Marvel universe in general at that point in time in the mid 80s. Paul has another question, which is, do you think as comic book films and TV shows are really popular right now, that it is having an effect on the comic book industry? For an example, once a film or TV show comes out, then if the title is currently running, they seem to change the comic book to look more like the TV show. Or sometimes I can pick up a new title and think that it reads like a storyboard for a new TV show. What are your thoughts about this and the rise of the comic book on screens? I actually did an episode discussing the topic in detail. It was Comic Book Savant episode 441. It was the comic book discussion, the after effect. In this episode, it discussed the what exactly you asked, the effects the comic book movies have had on the comic book industry, and I go into depth. It's a whole episode where I give my thoughts in it, so I could just refer you to that episode. I don't really think, because I did that episode like a year ago, within the past year, if I'm not mistaken, year or year and a half or so ago, roughly. My feelings, I don't think, have changed at all on it, and like I said, I go into great detail, so I won't go over it now. I will just refer you to that episode to listen to. And the last question for this episode is there a comic book you wish they would make into a movie or TV show? And one that came to mind that they were trying to develop as a movie, and then it was rumblings about a TV show, but then it just all kind of drifted away over the years of them figuring out how they would do it, was the JMS Rising Stars series that he did over at Image Comics. They were, at the time, was such a hot book, but they had so many issues getting the book out on time with the artwork and the writing, and it was a success, but then an unlitigated disaster at the same time. I always thought, and they talked about it for a long time, about trying to make it a movie, and would you make it like a trilogy of movies? Because that series ran for a good while, and it was a magnum opus, and it was going to be hard to be able to fit this story. I can't remember how many issues it was, but I mean, it's contained by, it had the main series, and then I think they had some mini series or limited series after the main series ended. I never finished reading all of it. I have it in my queue in Comixology Unlimited to finally finish reading it. I got about halfway through the series, but the production of the book as the issues were released were so hit or miss. Literally, it will be months between issues, so I just lost track of it. But it was so potent, and I felt like it would make a great series of movies. But this was before the MCU was a thing, and it was that hot property before Kevin Feige got Iron Man up and running, and then the whole game changed. So I feel like it's a forgotten kind of thing. I think this would be something nowadays that probably I feel would be a great series on Netflix or like HBO Max, on one of the streaming services, if they did like a computer generated version of it, or even animated, hand-drawn animated version of it as a animated series, kind of anime style, that it would take however many seasons to go through this story, maybe do like 10 episodes a season over like a 5-season rip to tell that whole story. I think it would be easier than trying to produce. I think it would be too costly to produce it any other way as a live action or a movie series, especially in the times that we're living in now. It would just be too big of a risk to do any other way outside of like animated in some shape, form, or fashion. And it's a little bit more adult, so you could get away with it on Netflix or HBO Max or one of the streaming services, and trying to make it commercially viable for, like I said, because it's a large cast of characters with powers. I don't think any studio would put up the capital it would take to try to produce a live action. And you couldn't do it all in a 2-hour movie. So it would have to be at minimum a trilogy of movies to kind of try to pull that off. And then you're talking about, to produce that on the level it needed to be produced. Yeah, you would probably, for that trilogy, you would be pushing close to, and that's probably before you even getting marketing in play, hundreds of millions of dollars, to pull that off successfully. At least 500 to 600 million, trying to, with the advances with the special effects kind of thing, to pull that off, it would be at least 600 million to produce a fairly decent adaptation of that trilogy of movies, minimum. Maybe pushing close to $1 billion once you throw marketing in there. it would be a big investment. I don't think anyone would be willing to do that at this point, but that would be the one. But that's all the questions and answers I have for you guys for this episode. I will be posting on social media and everything else about another round. I like to do these. I basically will post once I record one of these episodes, I got questions episode, I will post another thread to field more questions. And once I get about 5 or so, because I know I can fit them in at least one episode, sometime more depending on the questions, then I will close it out, answer the questions, get it set to record. So more will be coming. So I will post it on, I try to post it on all social media, on Patreon for the Patreon supporters, in the Facebook group for the Facebook group, and on Instagram and everywhere else. So I will remember to continually to do that. So if you have any questions you want me to answer or you're curious about, just post it when I put that post out there. Just respond to that post, and I will make a point to answer your question on the next episode of Got Questions. But that's all I have for you guys for this episode. As always, you can follow me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Comic Book Savant. You can go to the website, which is comicbooksavant.com, to find all the links to all the different things, Facebook and the Facebook group. All the links are on the website. It's a one-stop shop to find any and everything related to the show. But again, that's all I have for you guys for this episode. I hope everyone is staying safe. Until next time, you guys take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.